In such a turbulent and cutthroat video game industry, there are a few game companies that stand out as elite. One such company is Capcom. Capcom has been around for a long time and has been through the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. So low that around 2015 it was rumored they'd go bankrupt. But it was after that point Capcom changed, and for the better. For the past few years they have been on a meteoric rise and there are no signs of stopping. So what happened? Let's start at their lowest point in recent years. You would never think the company that put out wildly successful Resident Evil and Street Fighter games would have financial issues. Yet that was the case leading up to Street Fighter V that would release in February 2016. It has been disputed, but there were rumors Capcom would need to declare bankruptcy around that time. Whether or not it was true, Capcom was obviously doing terribly financially. 2015 had no notable game releases. Street Fighter V released with a rushed and half-baked single-player campaign, and many features and modes found in other fighting games were not there. It was obvious the game was rushed and needed to launch. Against the competition, Street Fighter V was clearly inferior. Further, as I'll discuss in a moment, Resident Evil 7 was a large departure from Resident Evil 6, so Capcom was obviously not happy with how the Resident Evil series was doing. Looking at all these facts, Capcom was doing terribly and was in a desperate state when Street Fighter V released. But it was after that point Capcom started changing. Just everyone else did not know it yet. Capcom diligently fixed Street Fighter V to be in a much better state, and the game had enticing DLC characters and updates for its seasons over the next few years. After Street Fighter V, Resident Evil 7 would release in the next year, 2017. RE7 was a huge departure from where the series seemed to be heading with RE6. It was first person, had an emphasis on horror, and even allowed you to play it in VR. It's also a great game that has now sold over 13 million units. In 2018, they released Monster Hunter World, an incredible game that was unbelievably successful, selling more than 25 million units as of this year. Then in 2019, Capcom released both Devil May Cry 5 and Resident Evil 2 Remake, and yes, both sold very well and were critically acclaimed. Continuing to 2020, they released Street Fighter V Champion Edition and Resident Evil 3 Remake. Funny enough, RE3 was one of the few missteps Capcom had, as it was generally received not as well and was an incredibly short game. Ultimately, it underwhelmed many. Yet, it still sold over 8 million copies and made a bunch of money. So as long as Capcom continued releasing bangers, they would have nothing to worry about. And amazingly, Capcom released banger after banger. In 2021, it released Resident Evil Village and Monster Hunter Rise. In 2023, they released Resident Evil 4 Remake and Street Fighter 6. RE4 Remake just topped 7 million in sales, and Street Fighter 6 recently passed 3 million in sales, which is significant. In 2024, Dragon's Dogma 2 released and sold over 2.5 million units in 11 days. Capcom is not just succeeding, they're thriving. To put it in perspective, in the current games industry and tech industry, there have been large layoffs everywhere, with studio closures as well. Capcom, on the other hand, is doing so well that they announced they were increasing their employees' salaries this year and are increasing starting salaries by 28%. Ultimately, Capcom is so successful now because before 2016, it knew it had to change and knew it had to develop a new business plan. Sometime before Street Fighter V released, likely in 2014 or late 2013, Capcom knew they were not headed in the right direction as a company. It's evident because in 2014 and 2015, there were really no large games released by Capcom, which makes sense because if they were shifting to a new development and business plan, they would need to implement it and begin working on their games to execute this new plan. Looking back, it's obvious what they chose to do. Instead of releasing a huge number of games like they used to, they shifted focus and would only develop a smaller number of games at a time. Further, the focus would largely be on popular existing franchises that can sell a lot of copies. But most importantly, they knew they could not just release games that were simply okay or good. If they could not figure out how to create extremely great games, then this new business model would not work. Who cares about RE2 Remake if it was a 6 or 7 out of 10? It may sell, but an RE3 remake would have less hype and on and on. They had to release universally loved and acclaimed games, 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 types of games, which is also the toughest part of this plan. Somehow, they succeeded. But that is not all. As smart as Capcom was when it came to changing, they were also smart in what they did not change. For many games prior to 2016, Capcom utilized their own internal engine, the MT Framework engine. They then switched to their current engine called the RE engine. This was incredibly smart, as they do not need to pay any other company to use their game engine, such as Unreal Engine. Additionally, by consolidating and having one engine, it allows all their different development teams to become experts at that one engine. So if one team is having trouble in development or cannot overcome an issue, there are a bunch of other teams there with knowledge that can lend a hand if needed. It ensures consistency in development, which leads to lower development time and cost, which are both invaluable in the games industry. Lastly, I would be remiss not to mention Capcom's release schedule. Most of their games are developed efficiently due to using a common engine, so it does not take 5 to 6 years to develop a sequel like other game studios. They also don't force or rush their games. In 2022, they didn't have any large game releases, and they were content with that because they knew they would have a huge 2023. Importantly, they also do not release exclusive games. They release their new titles on PC and multiple consoles, allowing any gamer to pick up the game on any platform they prefer. So far, this has worked wonders for them, and it benefits gamers as well. In conclusion, it cannot be overstated how well Capcom is doing right now, and deservedly so. The future is bright. Monster Hunter Wilds is set to release in 2025, and hands-on impressions are overwhelmingly positive. It is no wonder that other struggling companies like Square Enix are changing their business model to do what Capcom is doing. It's a recipe for success. Then on the day I was going to release this video, Nintendo and Capcom announced the Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection, which was not thought to be possible. Many games in this collection are a huge deal to a ton of gamers, so that Capcom is actually releasing this collection is unbelievably great, and reinforces just how awesome Capcom is doing right now. In the early 2010s, there were articles that read The Decay of Capcom. By 2020, many were beginning to believe Capcom was on a path towards another golden era. Now, there's no debate. This is not just another golden era for Capcom. They are not simply Cap God either. They are much more than that. They are one of the best this industry has to offer. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.